Today's reel concerns corporate compliance and the question whether it does really matter or not. I would like to address the question by quoting the House of Lords Fraud Act 2006 and Digital Fraud Committee's report titled Fighting Fraud, Breaking the Chain from November 2022. And the Commission quotes that fraud makes up a shocking 41% of all crime against individuals in England and Wales. At the same time, only 1% of law enforcement officers was tackling economic crime, which means that the number of people handling almost half of crime is heavily insufficient. And therefore, the committee recommends public-private partnership and the course towards strengthening the corporate liability for failure to prevent fraud, in particular providers of e-commerce platforms or places where fraud against individuals may be committed. But obviously, the catalog of crimes that is part of the definition of fraud is much wider. Therefore, this regulation may affect also currently obliged institutions as regulated by the AML laws and regulations or other participants of business operations. This is the first reason why compliance matters, because without corporate compliance, it's much easier for organized criminals to commit fraud and to harm innocent individuals, but also entities. And the cost of fraud across the world is really high, and it's growing. So another reason is also that the fact that basically we are facing the growing cost of accepting the fact that fraud is committed. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, from the big corporate vehicles perspective, is the outcome of the 2023 report of Europol titled The Other Side of the Coin, where we can read that only 2% of all criminal gains are subject to forfeiture. So basically 98% of proceeds of crime are still in financial circulation, are still used to corrupt and commit other and more crimes by the organized groups. So Europol, as the House of Lords in the UK, also recommends private-public partnership, which, as I quote here, plays a pivotal role in preventing criminal profits from entering the legal financial system. And in this respect, we can highlight the fact that this year, in 2024, in July, or in June, in fact, the new AML package of the European Union has been published, and very shortly we'll see the first in history of the European Union regulation on fighting money laundering. By 2024, we had only EU AML directives, which required local implementations, and that was a challenge for aligned and coordinated response to money laundering and to financial crime, because many countries implemented, or every country actually implemented, had been implementing the directives very individually and very specifically for a particular jurisdiction, and that was a trouble for a problem for police forces or the FIUs, the financial intelligence units, in exchange of information, in undertaking the joint effort to fight organized crime. Corporate compliance is one of the elements of the whole network or spectrum of means of responding to the threat of the organized crime. And organized crime apparently is the most important and most burning issue for Europol and for the EU police force, as we can read it in the report from 2024 titled Decoding the EU's Most Threatening Criminal Networks, where we can read that across the EU we have identified 821 most threatening criminal groups, which employ under different, of course, titles over 25,000 people who support their operations and who threaten the stability of the EU financial ecosystem and for the society, for people living across the EU, who are also targeted by those criminals. As we can see in the report by Europol, there are 6 factors that provide the criminals with the competitive advantage against the law enforcement, and that need to be addressed in order to enhance the capabilities of the law enforcement agencies in fight against organized crime. First element is the infiltration of the legal business system of the world, business world. So the criminals are actually present in business circulation. That means that in order to effectively fight organized crime, we need to be able to identify the wolves amongst sheep. And as you can see on the picture below, very often the wolves look even better or more professional than the sheep themselves, which actually makes the detection of of rotten apples much more difficult. And criminals have enough resources to infiltrate the legal entities and to seek their aid in disguising the criminal proceeds so that the law enforcement agencies and the obliged institutions by the laws on prevention of money laundering and terrorism financing. Therefore, we need further, broader cooperation in building a better, more efficient detection model for identifying those who engage with organized crime. And that requires aforementioned private-public partnership. What is also noted by Europol is the fact that international organized crime groups operate internationally, but with the regional focus, which means that they utilize locals, they utilize local criminal groups, local criminals for researching and building better understanding of the local environment, and therefore better aligning and mingling with the local environment, and therefore being less visible again for the law enforcement actions and the law enforcement forces. The criminals are also very adaptive and very prone and open to solve problems instead of discussing them, which is quite the opposite of many actions of obliged institutions or the law enforcement patchwork responsible for fighting organized crime. So for criminals, changing the operating model, changing the location of executing particular criminal operations is actually the matter of hours or days. For law enforcement operations and for the obliged institutions, getting information, responding to information takes sometimes, and it's not very seldom, weeks and months, if not years, which actually at the end of the day means that the criminals may easily move the money to safer locations, and there is no effect of those legal actions, because once the decision is made, once the action is taken, there is no proceeds of crime anymore that can be forfeited and seized. Or seized and forfeited. Effective cooperation model is also something that that criminals apply. So they have no problem with various jurisdictions. They just talk to each other. They don't need any specific administrative decisions on any specific support from bureaucracy in order to communicate. Moreover, criminals also apply resources, specialized experts who support their operations, and sometimes these experts are misused, so they are not even aware that they participate in criminal operations. But sometimes, and which is actually number 5 on my list, those experts are subject to corruption attempts, and these corrupt offers on some occasions are being accepted. And those people who accept these bribes from organized crime groups believe, I guess, that it's easy to say no for on the next occasion where the criminals would ask for some favor. However, it's not the case, because once you are bought or convinced to accept the bribe, then it's very difficult to step back and to say no. And criminals also use the combined strategy of violence and corruption. So whoever does not accept the bribe may be threatened and may be subject to to harassment or other severe criminal action. So criminals seem to be a step ahead the law enforcement operations. However, the battle is not lost yet, right? The war is not lost. Maybe some battles are being lost, but we still can do a lot to win in this competition, in this game. Based on the review of various Europol and OECD and United Nations reports, it's quite apparent that we have 4 elements that need to be targeted in order to gain the competitive advantage against the criminals. First element is obviously the symmetrical response and public-private alignment or partnership in fighting organized crime. And compliance programs is one of the elements of this public-private partnership. So preventing fraud by corporate vehicles is one of the elements of the whole system of detection and fighting of organized crime operations. But obviously, in order to discourage new members of the organized crime groups or to influence the decisions of being part of these groups by current members of the group, we need to provide attractive alternative. We need to enable people to find decent jobs. We need to enable people to get education, to better understand the negative impact of organized crime on society. The research in the south of Italy shows or proves that the GDP of the organized crime controlled regions and areas is much lower than the GDP of the northern parts of Italy. That's one example. Of course, we need to build awareness around the problem of organized crime and impact of the crime on business operations and on society. And last but not least, ensure effective forfeiture of criminal gains, because without the money, the organized crime operations do not pay off, and then people who are engaged in them look for attractive alternatives. Thank you for bearing with me, and see you next time. I hope this material you may find useful. Goodbye.